Ever wondered who really pulls the strings in America? Could it be the shadowy group that huddled in secret on Jekyll Island to craft our central banks, now controlling trillions of dollars? Or maybe it's the folks who own the lion's share of the stock market. Some say it's the big three asset managers BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street holding sway over $23 trillion in proxy votes across 90% of the stock market. And who's the US in debt to for all this cash? What about the mysterious landlords controlling 1.3 billion acres, from mega players like the Emersons to John Malone and even Bill Gates? Or perhaps it's the tech giants harvesting 175 zettabytes of our online data, tracking our every move. This rabbit hole goes deep. In this video, I'm gonna break down the different layers of control, how they've shifted over time, from land to money, corporations to debt, and beyond. By the end, you'll have a clear picture of who's really running the show. And stick around, cause I'm also sharing what I think the real answer is and a solution that might surprise you. Let's jump in. Hey there! Great to have you. Come for the finance, stay for the Illuminati vibes. Back in the 19th century, owning land was the ultimate power move. Under the Pacific Railway Act of 1862, Congress handed over 174 million acres of public land to the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroad's massive stretches of territory. Then something wild happened. Union Pacific insiders set up this shady deal called the Credit Mobilier Construction Company, slipping discounted or even free shares to key congressmen and power players to secure friendly laws and funding. When this all blew up in 1872, it showed how land grants could straight up by political influence and corporate control over new territories. Fast forward to today, and a handful of mega landlords still hold crazy sway over local economies and politics. Private owners control 1.3 billion acres, that's about 60% of US land. Some names might not ring a bell, like the Emerson family with over 2.4 million acres, or John Malone with 2.2 million. Even tech moguls like Bill Gates are in the game, snapping up over 200,000 acres of farmland across 18 states. In Nebraska alone, his Mount Edna Farms LLC owns over 20,000 acres. People are starting to worry if any of this land goes tax-exempt. As a nonprofit, it could tank property tax revenue, hitting schools, services, everything. So land ownership still equals big power control over tax money, voting districts, and resources. Now, if land was the OG source of power, credit took it to the next level. It's still a massive force, not just in the US but globally. The origin story of credit sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's real. In November 1910, a secret crew of bankers led by J.P. Morgan, National City, First National Bank of New York, and others met up at Jekyll Island under Senator Aldrich's wing. Their mission: create the Federal Reserve Act to control America's money supply. There's this famous quote, often tied to Meyer Amschel Rothschild: "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I don't care who writes its laws." The Rothschild laid the groundwork for central banking in the 1800s, but despite all the conspiracy chatter, they didn't directly own the Fed. Instead, it's owned by smaller US commercial banks. When Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act in December 1913, it birthed 12 regional reserve banks with the superpower of fractional reserve banking. Here's how it worked until recently. You deposit $100, the bank keeps $10 as vault cash and lends out $90. Your account still shows $100, but that $90 loan creates new money. Whoever gets that $90 deposits it, and their bank lends out 90% of that, and on it goes, turning $100 into up to $1,000 in credit. Wild, right? But in March 2020, the Fed dropped the reserve requirement to zero. Banks can now lend out everything you deposit under the Fed's watchful eye. Today, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet is over $6 trillion, controlling mortgage rates via the 10-year Treasury, corporate credit, and even your paycheck's buying power. The president can't fire the Fed's head or control it, so some say if a few banks decide how many dollars get made, that's one way to own a country. Now, if banks control the cash, who's got the stock market on lock? One big theory points to the Holy Trinity: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. BlackRock gets a lot of buzz online. Some call it a robot ruling more wealth than any country. With Larry Fink as the mastermind, they've got stakes in 95% of Fortune 500 companies and work with governments worldwide on financial crises and regular operations. Imagine controlling 88% of S&P 500 CEOs. What kind of clout is that? The claim that these three own the stock market is both wrong and right. Wrong because they manage trillions, but it's mostly our money, yours and mine. Right because their influence is huge. Charlie Munger once said of BlackRock's Larry Fink, "I think the world of him, but I'm not sure I want him as my emperor." Here's how it works. The stock market can create its own money when companies issue new shares. Take MicroStrategy, they issue shares to buy more Bitcoin, hoping to boost their stock value. Who decides which companies can do this? The company's board and sometimes shareholders if the dilution's big. Enter BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. They don't directly fire CEOs, but they vote on board members who can. With $23 trillion in proxy votes across 90% of US stocks, they're major players in 95% of American corporations. When your ETF or mutual fund like Vanguard's VTSAX votes, these giants cast your proxy vote for you. Most of us don't have time to vote on corporate matters, so their stewardship teams decide based on their policies. So while they don't own the market, their voting power gives them serious control. That's why some ask, if three asset managers hold the biggest voting blocks in nearly every major company, who really owns corporate America? Now, if banks and companies can borrow endlessly, and the US does the same with treasury bonds, who's the US in debt to? In 2024, the US had over $36 trillion in federal debt, 120% of GDP, more than a year's worth of everything we produce. About 80% is held by public investors, with 20% as intergovernmental debt. Of the $29 trillion public debt, foreign investors own $8.5 trillion, 30%, with Japan and China holding $1.8 trillion combined. You've probably heard rumors that China or Japan could tank the US by dumping their bonds, but that'd crash bond prices, spike interest rates, and hurt their own holdings. They're tied to our economy as much as we are. The biggest debt holder? The Federal Reserve with over $6 trillion. Other holders include pension funds, banks, and even you if you own bonds. Bondholders own a slice of America's future tax revenue, earning interest when the government pays up. But here's the catch. If the US debt gets too risky, investors might demand higher interest rates to lend. Most economists say our debt path isn't sustainable long-term. Higher debt means higher interest rates to attract investors, which spikes borrowing costs, an endless loop. That's why some, like President Trump, push for lower rates to refinance. Cheaper. If banks, companies, and the government can borrow endlessly, can't we just vote in the right people to fix it? Easier said than done. In 2024, 100 billionaire families dropped a record to $0.6 billion on federal races, about a sixth of total spending. The top 50 donors gave to $0.5 billion, with Republicans outspending Democrats 2-1. Elon Musk was a big player, pouring hundreds of millions into Trump's causes. Miriam Adelson gave over $100 million, and Timothy Mellon dropped $197 million, mostly to GOP super PACs. Add $1.9 billion in dark money from anonymous groups, and you see the picture. Democrats aren't slacking either. George Soros's group spent big, like $140 million in 2021 via Open Society Foundations and $170 million in the 2022 midterms. In 2024, his affiliates gave $600,000 to groups like the Texas Organizing Project and $250,000 $100,000 each to Democratic parties in Wisconsin and Ohio. This rabbit hole is deep, but the point is, massive money flows shape who runs for office and who wins. So who really controls America? It depends on what you value. Some prioritize political power, others social influence or free speech. There's no single puppet master. For me, it's about economic energy like this dollar bill. It's my time and skills turned into something I can trade for food or shelter. But someone controls this energy with a button that zaps its value. I feel it when I shop and my money buys less. The rich figured this out. They store their energy in assets like stocks, real estate, or art to hold value longer. These assets carry a premium because they're desirable for preserving wealth, not just utility. A house is a house, but some cost millions because they store economic energy better. Here's a wild example from a tweet by Tad Smith. In 2017, a Basquiat painting sold for $110.5 million to 55,000 bitcoins at $2,000 each. By July 2025, bitcoins at $117,000. So that painting's worth just 941 bitcoins, a 98% value drop in Bitcoin terms. Same with real estate. From 2016 to 2024, the average house rose 50% in dollars, but lost 99% in Bitcoin value. Bitcoin's sucking the premium out of traditional assets because it's seen as a superior store of economic energy. I'm not here to pitch Bitcoin. It's not for everyone, but if preserving your time's value matters, it's worth a look. Hope this opened your eyes. Smash that like button. Subscribe if you're new, and let me know your thoughts below. Catch you next week. Stay curious. Peace out.